Hello, this is Reindeer's Bees, and I'm going to talk about bee breeds today. There are 5 main bee breeds in the US, and then I'd say one more sub-breed. So Carnolin, Italian, Caucasian, Buckfast, and Russian. And then the 6th one, the Cordovan is pretty similar to the Italian. It's a subspecies of Italian. So I'm going to go through the five main types or breeds of bees and the traits that are generally associated with them. So Italian. So they are by far the most common bee in the US. I don't think it's even close. And that's due to them raising more brood most of the year. So the Italians, they want to raise a lot of brood all the time. It doesn't matter the conditions. They just want to keep rearing brood, keep rearing brood. So this leads to bigger populations in the fall and the spring, but it also leads to them eating a lot more food during the summer, fall, spring, any season. They're just chomping away. They're eating themselves out of house and home, which works great for the commercial beekeepers because those bees are ready in the early spring to go to almond pollination. So that's the advantage of having an Italian bee. They build up way earlier than all the other breeds. They're also considered the nicest bee in the US. I think you can have Carnolins and Buckfasts and whatever just as nice as the Italians, but for whatever reason, that's the general idea with Italians, is that they're the nicest bee in the US. So Carnolins, they cluster smaller and they build up really fast in the spring. So a Carnolin cluster can heat more frames of brood with less bees than an Italian hive. An Italian hive, you see like too thick cluster of bees on each frame to keep a frame of brood warm, and there's like, on a Carnolin hives, you'll have like a couple hundred bees on the frame and they're heating up the brood. So they're able to heat up more brood with less bees, and when that first pollen hits, they go crazy. So they build up really fast in the spring, especially when the first pollen hits. They pull back faster during the summer when the dearth hits and there's not food coming in. They're pretty gentle, I think. It all depends on whose Carnolins you have, I suppose. I'm sure there are mean ones and there are also very nice ones too. Carnolins also forage on colder days. And so if it's 45 degrees, they're more apt to forage than an Italian bee because they're darker. That's what they developed on in Europe. So Carnolins. So the last 3 varieties, Caucasian, Buckfast, and Russian, they have a few different traits, but generally they're like the Carnolins. They have smaller clusters, they conserve food really well, and they build up extremely fast in the spring. Now, Russians and Carnolins are considered more swarmy than the Buckfast. The Buckfast have a reputation of not swarming, but they're all pretty similar in that way. And the other way they're similar is they all forage at lower temperatures. So I didn't want to repeat myself 4 times because they all have those similar traits. So now I'm going to talk about the traits that they do differ on. So with the Caucasian, they produce a ton of propolis, so much propolis. So in the US, we've been breeding bees not to have propolis for a really long time, over 100 years, I would guess. And that's just because it's easier to inspect the hives. But from data that we've learned from research at universities recently, the bees actually do a lot better when they have a propolis envelope. It means they just have a lot of propolis around in the hives. It's kind of like their community defense against diseases and everything. So a hive that has a lot of propolis, a propolis envelope in there, deals with mite diseases, viruses, and just viruses not related to mites. So they're just a healthier colony that's more resistant. So it might be a pain in the butt to pull that frame out when there's a lot of propolis on the frame rest, but in the end, it's probably worth it because you're gonna have stronger bees. So over time, I'd like to breed my strain of bees towards more propolis and not less, because I think the hives are just gonna be healthier in the long run. And it's a good trade-off, I think. And then the Caucasians are also very likely to forage for different flowers. I read this online. I'm not entirely sure how accurate this is, but Caucasian hives, they have a longer tongue, so they're able to forage on different flowers than some of the other bees, and they also forage at lower temperatures like the other Carnolin, Caucasian, Russian, and Buckfast. Yeah. So the Buckfast, how are they different than the other three smaller varieties that have smaller clusters and can serve food better? So the Buckfast have a reputation of being excellent honey producers, as well as very low swarming. Paul Kelly keeps Buckfast at the University of Guelph. And they were developed by Brother Adam in England. So they're better at foraging in really damp, colder conditions because that's pretty common in England. So they're very good at that, excellent honey producers. I think partially due to that, and they don't swarm as much as some of the other varieties. So Russian bees. So they're pretty controversial in the US. They were brought over, I believe, in the early 90s or early 2000s. And they were broken up into like 16 different lines. And they all have different mechanisms of mite resistance and some differences, but they have also a lot of similarities as well. So the Russians, what they're known for is they're very resistant at mites. You might say, well, I've gotten a Russian hive and they just got mites like the others. Well, that's probably because you didn't get a Russian hive. A lot of people sell Russian hybrids, but if it's not from the Russian Breeders Association, I think there's like 15 members, it's not a Russian queen in my mind. Go to the Russian queen breeders. They have legitimate Russian bees that are genetically tested every year to ensure their purity. So go to them, get the best bees you can, and they'll be a lot different than your hybrid Russians, which is just a marketing ploy in my mind, at least. And then the interesting part, other than the mites, they're like the other bees, don't build up fast, or they build up really fast, but they winter in smaller clusters. The Russians also are known for completely shutting down in the dearth. Sometimes, if food isn't coming in, the other varieties will severely decrease their brood production, but the Russians are known to just stop. Like the queen will be perfectly fine in the hive and they will just stop laying for a certain amount of time until the resources pick up. This doesn't happen in all places or by all Russian queens, but some do this, and this is unusual. Now that I've described to you all the breeds, my closing message is bees are bees. So none of these are purebred unless they're artificially inseminated or you have like drone flooding yards with guaranteed stock. So your bees are all mutts. Breed from the ones that have a certain trait. If they have a certain color, that doesn't matter. Breed from the ones that have the best traits, and that's how you'll find the best bee for you. Keep breeding your bees. They'll be kind of muddy, but as long as they have the traits that you like, who cares? So if you want to learn more about my opinions on whether southern bees can make it in northern climates, check out this video. I made it yesterday, and I hope you enjoy.